The Scavenger's Daughter. Henry VIII's secret torture device. They called it the most ingenious torture device ever created. Not because it tore flesh or broke bones, but because it compressed the human body into a position so unnatural, so excruciating, that victims would confess to anything just to make it stop. Hidden deep within the Tower of London's torture chambers, the Scavenger's Daughter waited in the shadows. Unlike its famous cousin, the rack, which stretched bodies apart, this device did something far worse. It folded them, compressed them, crushed them from within. And the man who perfected its use? None other than Henry VIII, the king who transformed England through blood, betrayal, and an arsenal of torture devices that would make even the Spanish Inquisition take notice. Tonight on Ash Crown History, we uncover the truth about Henry VIII's most secret torture device. A contraption so effective at breaking human will that its very existence was denied for centuries. If you're fascinated by the dark corners of English history that textbooks won't teach you, make sure to subscribe to Ash Crown History and ring the notification bell. Because what you're about to learn will change everything you thought you knew about Tudor torture. The year is 1534. Thomas Cromwell, Henry VIII Chief Minister, has a problem. Catholic rebels are rising across England, refusing to acknowledge Henry as supreme head of the church. The rack isn't working fast enough. The thumbscrews leave too many able to resist. He needs something new. Something that will break both body and spirit without leaving visible marks that might make martyrs of the victims. Enter Leonard Skeffington, Lieutenant of the Tower of London. A man whose name would become synonymous with cruelty, and whose invention would bear his name in its original form. Skeffington's gyves, later corrupted to Scavenger's Daughter. But this wasn't just any torture device. This was psychological warfare perfected in iron. Picture an iron hoop, hinged in the middle with spaces for the head, hands, and feet. The victim would be forced to sit on the ground, knees drawn up to their chest. The device would then be closed around them, compressing their body into a ball. But here's where Skeffington's genius becomes apparent. Unlike other torture devices that relied on external force, the Scavenger's Daughter used the victim's own body against them. As the iron bands tightened, the victim's spine would curve beyond its natural limit. The ribs would press against the lungs, making each breath a monumental effort. Blood would be forced from the nose and ears. The compression of the chest cavity would cause the heart to work harder, pumping blood that had nowhere to go. Victims reported feeling as if their bodies would explode from within. But the true horror wasn't just physical. The position was so unnatural, so fundamentally wrong, that the human mind would rebel against it. Victims described a unique form of panic, a primal terror that came from being folded into themselves. Some would begin confessing before the device was even fully tightened. The first recorded victim was Thomas Miagh, an Irish rebel who refused to acknowledge Henry's supremacy over the church. On March 5, 1534, he was subjected to the Scavenger's Daughter for 2 hours. The Tower records, discovered in the 19th century, describe his screams echoing through the fortress. After just 30 minutes, blood was streaming from his nose. After an hour, he had confessed to treason, heresy, and crimes he couldn't possibly have committed. When they finally released him, he couldn't stand for 3 days. But why was this device so special to Henry VIII? The answer lies in the king's paranoia. By 1534, Henry had broken with Rome, divorced Catherine of Aragon, and married Anne Boleyn. Enemies surrounded him. The Pope had excommunicated him. Catholic Europe was plotting his downfall. He needed confessions, and he needed them fast. The Scavenger's daughter could extract them in hours, not days. What made this device particularly insidious was its portability. Unlike the rack, which required a special chamber and multiple operators, the Scavenger's daughter could be carried to any cell in the tower. Could be set up in minutes. One guard could operate it alone. This meant interrogations could happen anywhere, anytime. The psychological impact on prisoners was devastating. They never knew when their door might open and the device might appear. The Tower of London during this period was a labyrinth of horror. The fortress, originally built by William the Conqueror in 1066, had evolved into England's most feared prison. By Henry VIII's reign, it housed an extensive collection of torture devices. The rack stretched victims until their joints dislocated. The thumbscrews crushed digits until bones splintered. The Iron Maiden, despite popular belief, was more threat than reality. But the Scavenger's daughter was different. It was elegant in its simplicity, devastating in its effect. Leonard Skeffington himself was a fascinating character. Appointed lieutenant of the Tower in 1534, he was known for his mechanical genius and his utter lack of mercy. Contemporary accounts describe him as a man who took pride in his work, who would personally oversee torture sessions to ensure maximum effectiveness. He supposedly refined the Scavenger's daughter through trial and error, adjusting the angles and pressures until he achieved what he called perfect compression. One account from a Spanish ambassador describes visiting the tower in 1535 and being shown the device. Skeffington demonstrated it on a straw dummy, explaining how the pressure points were carefully calculated to cause maximum discomfort without causing death. The ambassador wrote, "The English have surpassed even us in the art of extracting truth through suffering. But let's talk about the victims, because their stories are what truly reveal the horror of this device." In May 1535, 3 Carthusian monks were brought to the tower for refusing to take the oath of supremacy. One of them, Brother Sebastian Newdigate, was subjected to the Scavenger's daughter for over 3 hours. The accounts of his torture, written by fellow prisoners who heard his screams, describe a man driven to the edge of madness by the compression. What's particularly disturbing is that Newdigate was a personal friend of Henry VIII. They had known each other at court before Newdigate became a monk. Yet Henry personally ordered the use of the Scavenger's daughter on his former friend. When Newdigate still refused to break after 3 sessions, Henry had him hanged, drawn, and quartered, but not before subjecting him to one final session in the device, this time in the presence of other prisoners as a warning. The psychological warfare aspect of the Scavenger's daughter extended beyond its physical effects. Prisoners would be shown the device before being tortured, allowed to contemplate what was coming. Some would break just from seeing it. Others would be forced to watch fellow prisoners being tortured, knowing their turn was next. The tower guards developed a ritual around its use, slowly assembling it in front of the victim, explaining in detail what would happen to their body. By 1536, the device had become so notorious that mere mention of it in interrogation was often enough to secure cooperation. Thomas Percy, leader of the Pilgrimage of Grace Rebellion, reportedly confessed to all charges when told he would face the Scavenger's daughter. He chose execution over the device, later writing, "Death holds no terror compared to that infernal compression." The mechanics of the device were continuously refined throughout Henry's reign. Later versions included adjustable settings, allowing torturers to gradually increase pressure. Some versions had spikes on the interior surfaces, though these were rarely used as they defeated the purpose of leaving no visible marks. The most sophisticated version, created in 1540, had a ratcheting mechanism that would tighten incrementally, allowing for precise control of the victim's suffering. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of the Scavenger's Daughter was how it was integrated into the Tudor legal system. Unlike medieval torture, which was often arbitrary and unregulated, Henry VIII torture program was carefully documented and legally sanctioned. The use of the device was recorded in official Tower records, complete with dates, times, and results. These records, many of which survive today in the National Archives, provide a bureaucratic account of systematic cruelty. The tragedy of Thomas Fisher, Bishop of Rochester, illustrates this perfectly. In 1535, Fisher was brought to the Tower for refusing to acknowledge Henry as supreme head of the Church. At 65 years old, he was considered too frail for the rack. The Scavenger's Daughter was deemed more appropriate. The Tower records coldly note, "The bishop was compressed for 1 hour. Confession obtained regarding treasonous correspondence with Rome." What the records don't mention is that Fisher was so broken by the experience that he had to be carried to his execution. Witnesses described him as barely conscious, his body still bearing the bruises from the compression. His execution was botched. The elderly bishop's neck was so damaged from the torture that it took 3 blows of the axe to sever his head. The women of Henry's court weren't immune to this torture either, though their cases were often hidden from official records. Mark Smeaton, the musician accused of adultery with Anne Boleyn, was almost certainly subjected to the Scavenger's Daughter. He was the only one of Anne's alleged lovers to confess, and contemporary accounts mention he was tortured at the Tower before his confession. Some historians believe Anne herself was threatened with the device, though never actually subjected to it. Catherine Howard, Henry's 5th wife, faced a different but equally terrifying fate. When accusations of adultery surfaced in 1541, her ladies-in-waiting were subjected to intense interrogation. Lady Margaret Morton, one of Catherine's closest companions, was reportedly shown the Scavenger's Daughter and told she would be compressed until she revealed everything about the Queen's alleged affairs. The mere sight of the device was enough to break her resolve. She confessed to knowledge of Catherine's premarital relationships, sealing the young Queen's fate. The Scavenger's Daughter represents something unique in the history of torture, a device designed not to maim or mark, but to create pure suffering through the manipulation of the body's own structure. Modern medical analysis of the device's effects reveals just how sophisticated this torture was. The compression would cause immediate problems with circulation, leading to numbness and then excruciating pins and needles as blood flow was restored. The pressure on the chest would trigger a panic response as breathing became restricted. The curved spine position would put enormous pressure on the vertebrae, causing immediate and lasting pain. Dr. James Matthews, who examined surviving examples of the device in the 19th century, wrote, "The genius of this instrument lies in its exploitation of human anatomy. Every aspect is designed to cause maximum distress with minimum permanent damage. The victim could be tortured repeatedly without risk of death, making it ideal for extended interrogations. The device's use extended beyond Henry VIII's reign. During the reign of his daughter Elizabeth I, the Scavenger's daughter was employed against Catholic priests and Jesuit missionaries. The notorious torturer Richard Topcliffe was known to use it in conjunction with other devices, creating what he called a symphony of suffering. One victim, Father John Gerard, later wrote a detailed account of his torture, describing the Scavenger's daughter as a hell that compressed all the torments of the damned into a single moment. But here's something most historians won't tell you. In 1541, Henry VIII himself insisted on witnessing the device being used. The victim was Ralph Sadler, accused of embezzling funds from the royal treasury. According to a letter from the French ambassador, Henry watched for 20 minutes before ordering the torture stopped, not out of mercy, but because Sadler had soiled himself and the king found the scene distasteful. This single incident reveals more about Henry's character than volumes of biography. A man who could order torture without hesitation but couldn't stomach its reality. The Tower of London wasn't the only place where the Scavenger's daughter was used. Smaller versions were created for use in other prisons across England. The Fleet Prison had one. Newgate had two. There were even portable versions that could be carried to regional assizes. The device became a symbol of Tudor authority, a reminder that the king's justice could reach anyone, anywhere. One of the most disturbing discoveries came in 1876 when renovations at the tower uncovered a hidden chamber containing 3 Scavenger's daughters of different sizes. One was child-sized. The implications are horrifying. While there are no official records of children being tortured with the device, the very existence of a smaller version suggests it may have been used or at least threatened. The psychological impact of the Scavenger's daughter extended far beyond its victims. Guards who operated the device often reported nightmares. One tower guard, William Hopton, left a diary describing his experiences. He wrote of being haunted by the sounds victims made, not just screams, but what he called the crying of the bones, as bodies were compressed beyond their limits. Hopton eventually requested a transfer, claiming he could no longer sleep within the tower walls. The device also had an unexpected effect on those who ordered its use. Thomas Cromwell, who had enthusiastically endorsed the Scavenger's daughter, reportedly became increasingly paranoid about being subjected to it himself. When he was finally arrested in 1540, witnesses say his first question was whether he would face the device he had so often prescribed for others. He didn't. Henry had him beheaded instead, perhaps a final mercy from a king who had once called him friend. The international reaction to the Scavenger's daughter was one of horrified fascination. The Venetian ambassador wrote detailed reports back to the Doge, describing the device as an innovation in cruelty that surpasses even the imagination of Nero. The French court, no stranger to torture themselves, were reportedly appalled by accounts of its use. Even Emperor Charles V, Henry's great rival, expressed disgust at reports of the device, though this didn't stop him from inquiring about obtaining one for his own use. There's a lesser-known story that deserves telling. In 1538, a locksmith named Robert Pakington was commissioned to create a new version of the Scavenger's daughter. Pakington, a devout Catholic, was horrified when he learned what the device would be used for. According to his grandson's memoir, discovered in the Bodleian Library in 1923, Pakington deliberately sabotaged the mechanism, creating a flaw that would prevent it from closing completely. His version was used only once before being discarded as defective. Pakington's small act of resistance potentially saved dozens from torture. By the end of Henry VIII's reign in 1547, the Scavenger's daughter had become synonymous with Tudor tyranny. The device had been used on hundreds of victims: priests, nobles, merchants, anyone who stood in Henry's way. But its true legacy wasn't the confessions it extracted or the fear it inspired. It was the precedent it set for state-sanctioned torture in the name of political expediency. When Edward VI succeeded his father, one of his first acts was to restrict the use of torture in the Tower. The Scavenger's daughter was officially retired, though it remained on display as a warning. During Mary I's reign, it was briefly brought back into service against Protestant heretics. Elizabeth I's torturers preferred the rack, considering the Scavenger's daughter too closely associated with her father's excesses. The last recorded use of the Scavenger's daughter was in 1615, during the reign of James I. The victim was a Catholic priest named John Ogilvie, who was tortured in Edinburgh Castle with a Scottish version of the device. Even then, its use was controversial. Public opinion had turned against such methods. The age of judicial torture in Britain was coming to an end. But the device didn't simply disappear. Examples were kept as curiosities, reminders of a darker time. The Tower of London displayed one until the 19th century, when Victorian sensibilities deemed it too disturbing for public view. Today, only a few examples survive in museums, their iron bands a testament to human ingenuity applied to the darkest of purposes. What makes the Scavenger's daughter particularly relevant today is what it represents about the relationship between power and cruelty. Henry VIII didn't invent torture, but he industrialized it. He turned it into a bureaucratic process, complete with documentation and legal justification. The Scavenger's daughter wasn't just a torture device. It was a symbol of a system that prioritized confession over truth, compliance over justice. Modern interrogation experts study historical torture devices to understand what doesn't work. The Scavenger's daughter, they note, was remarkably effective at generating confessions but useless at obtaining accurate information. Victims would say anything to make the compression stop. They would implicate innocent people, confess to impossible crimes, agree to whatever their torturers suggested. The device proved that extreme physical torture corrupts the very information it seeks to extract. There's a persistent myth that needs addressing. Some claim the Scavenger's daughter was actually invented by Thomas Cromwell, or that it was imported from Spain. The historical record is clear. Leonard Skeffington created the device specifically for use in the Tower of London during Henry VIII's reign. The name Scavenger's daughter is indeed a corruption of Skeffington's gyves, with gyves being an old term for shackles. Recent archaeological excavations at the tower have uncovered more evidence of the device's use. In 2018, workers renovating the basement of the Queen's House discovered iron fragments that metallurgical analysis confirmed were consistent with a Scavenger's daughter. More disturbingly, they found scratches on the stone floor in a pattern that suggested a body compressed into an unnatural position had been dragged across it repeatedly. The cultural impact of the Scavenger's daughter extends beyond history into literature and popular culture. Shakespeare, writing just decades after its use, never mentioned it directly, the subject was too sensitive. But scholars have identified several oblique references to compression torture in his plays, particularly in Measure for Measure and King Lear. The device became a symbol of tyrannical excess that writers could invoke without naming. As we stand in the Tower of London today, tourists snap photos where prisoners once screamed. The gift shop sells replica torture devices as novelties. But if you know where to look, you can still see the marks. In the Beauchamp Tower, scratches on the walls spell out prayers carved by prisoners awaiting their turn with the Scavenger's daughter. In the Queen's house, dark stains on the floorboards mark where blood pooled during interrogations. The Scavenger's daughter serves as a warning from history. It reminds us that cruelty, when systematized and legalized, becomes even more terrifying than random violence. It shows us that human ingenuity, applied to causing suffering, can create horrors beyond imagination. And most importantly, it demonstrates that even the most powerful rulers, like Henry VIII, ultimately fail when they rule through fear rather than justice. As you leave this dark chapter of English history, remember that the Scavenger's daughter wasn't just a torture device. It was a mirror reflecting the worst aspects of absolute power. It showed what happens when law serves tyranny rather than justice, when confession matters more than truth, when the state's power to hurt exceeds its obligation to protect. The Tower of London still stands, its walls holding centuries of secrets. The Scavenger's daughter may be relegated to museums, but its lesson remains relevant. In every generation, there are those who would use pain to compel obedience, who would compress human dignity into nothing for the sake of power. The question we must ask ourselves is, have we truly learned from the horrors of the past, or have we simply become more sophisticated in our cruelties? Thank you for joining us on this journey into one of history's darkest corners. If you found this exploration of Tudor torture enlightening, please subscribe to Ash Crown History. Ring the notification bell to ensure you never miss our investigations into the hidden histories that shaped our world. Next week, we'll explore another secret from Henry VIII's reign, the mysterious disappearance of the princes in the Tower. Until then, remember, history's darkest moments often hold its most important lessons. The Scavenger's daughter may be gone, but the impulse that created it lives on. It's up to us to ensure it never again finds expression in iron and blood. This has been Ash Crown History, uncovering the stories they didn't want you to know.